At a crowded military base on a bright morning, an old veteran in a worn dress jacket arrived holding a simple envelope. He had spent years forgotten, pouring coffee at the VA, riding the bus alone, living quiet and unseen. When he tried to enter, a young officer blocked his way, saying he didn't belong. Minutes later, a general stopped the entire medal ceremony just to call his name. Before we dive in, tell us in comments where in the world you are watching from. Sir, you can't be here. Captain Ethan Cole stood at the side gate, arm out, blocking the narrow entrance. Ray Walker stopped on the painted line, old dress jacket neat and clean, a thin envelope and a worn photograph held tight in his hands. Behind them, cars moved toward the bright main doors, uniforms shining, families hurrying in for the medal ceremony. Ethan checked his tablet, then Ray's faded ID, and his tone went even harder. You're not on the list. This event is for invited guests only. Ray swallowed and said a young lieutenant had asked him to come, said it meant a lot. He was here. Ethan cut him off and pointed towards the parking lot. I'm sorry, sir. You don't belong here today. He didn't argue, just waited. Ray stepped back into the shadow of the wall as the doors closed, and the music started without him. The words, "You don't belong here, sir," were still hanging in the air when Ray stepped back from the gate and rested his shoulder against the cold wall. He lowered his eyes to the envelope in his hand, and for a moment the bright glass doors in front of him blurred, replaced by black sky and spinning rotors. Years ago, he had stood in the open door of a shaking helicopter, wind tearing at his face, tracer rounds cutting the night below. His platoon was trapped in a ruined street, pinned down behind a broken wall. The pilot yelled they had to pull away, fuel low, fire too heavy. Ray heard the fear in the voices on the radio, heard one of his boys shout his name, and he made his choice. We're going back in, he'd said, calm and firm. He dropped down into dust and smoke, running bent over, grabbing men by their vests, dragging them to cover, shoving one, then another, toward the landing zone. He didn't climb into the helicopter until the last man was on board. He only climbed in when he could count them all in the dim red light. The war didn't stay. It washed past him and kept going. The medals for nights like that ended up in a shoebox under his bed. His world became a narrow one, a small apartment with a slow ticking clock, quiet mornings at the VA helping other old soldiers with forms their hands shook too much to fill, and a corner stool at a diner where the waitress knew he liked extra sugar, but didn't know he once carried men through fire. His morning had felt different. He had shaved twice, pressed his jacket until the cloth lay smooth, and slipped a handwritten note from Lieutenant Mark Davis into his pocket. Sir, it would mean a lot if you were there. That line had warmed his chest all the way to the base. Now the same envelope trembled between his fingers as the band inside swelled for the opening march, and Ray stood outside the closed doors, hearing every note and knowing not a single person in that bright hall knew he was there. The band inside swelled for the opening march, and Ray's fingers tightened on the envelope as if he could hold on to the reason he had come. After a moment, he pushed himself off the wall and stepped back toward the side gate, moving slow, not wanting trouble, just one more try. Captain, he said quietly, stopping short of the painted line. I do have an invitation. It's from Lieutenant Mark Davis. He opened the envelope with careful hands and held out the plain sheet of paper, the ink from that familiar hand pressed deep into the fibers. Ethan barely glanced at it. Sir, this isn't an official pass, he said, voice sharper now. If we let every old vet with a handwritten note walk in, there'd be chaos. A couple of younger soldiers near the gate shifted on their feet. One of them looked at the letter, then at Ray's lined face, and something in his expression softened. But Ethan had already turned his head, raising his voice just enough for them to hear. Happens every big event, he muttered. Some guy from the old days thinks he deserves a front row seat. The sentry kept the line moving because that was the order. Ray folded the letter again, slower this time, like it hurt to bend. He stepped even farther back, resting against a concrete pillar where the sound from inside came thin and distant. When the national anthem began, a civilian guest paused at the gate and nodded toward Ray. Is he supposed to be out there? Ethan shrugged. He's probably confused, he said. One of those fellows who can't let the past go completely. Inside the hall, the anthem ended and people sat down, the sound of chairs and uniforms filling the pause. Lieutenant Mark Davis stood in the front row, trying to look calm, but his eyes kept going to the side door. He had asked one person to come today, one person who mattered more than the cameras and the officers on stage. Each time the door opened, he hoped to see an older man in a worn dress jacket. Each time, it was someone else. On stage, the general began to read from Mark's citation. He spoke about a night patrol gone wrong, heavy fire, and how Mark had refused to leave his wounded men behind. The words sounded big to the audience, but to Mark, they were simple. They were the same rule he had been given years ago in a hot tent by an old captain named Walker. In that memory, Ray Walker had sat across from a young, shaking Private Davis, a map between them. Ray's voice was calm and firm. "You never leave your people behind," he had said. "Even if the paperwork forgets them, you don't." That line stayed with Mark in every hard moment after that. Back in the hall, Mark leaned toward the aide by the aisle. "Have you seen my guest yet?" he asked quietly. "Name's Raymond Walker. Older vet, gray hair, walks a little stiff." The aide frowned. He had seen that name printed under a framed black and white photo in the main corridor, his rank listed beside rows of heavy decorations. A small shock ran through him. Without waiting for the next applause, he slipped out toward the lobby to make sure the man in that picture was not standing outside alone. The aide pushed through the side door, applause rolling behind him, and stepped into the lobby. It did not take long to find Ray. He stood where a man would stand who did not want to be in the way, half behind a concrete pillar, eyes on the floor, envelope held in both hands. For a moment the aide watched him, seeing not a stranger but the same posture from the old photograph in the corridor. Then he turned and went straight back inside. By the time he reached the front, the band had finished another short piece, and the announcer was lifting his notes to read the full citation for Lieutenant Mark Davis. The aide leaned close to Major General Harris and spoke in a low rush, giving only the facts. The name, the face, the mistake at the door. Harris's brow tightened. He repeated the name under his breath, testing it against memories of reports and casualty lists. Raymond Walker. A night convoy under fire. An entire company pulled out of a trap because one captain refused to leave anyone behind. Harris rose without warning and lifted his hand. The music stopped. The announcer's voice fell silent on half a sentence. A puzzled hush ran through the whole hall as cameras and faces turned toward the stage. Harris took the microphone. "Before we go any further," he said, calm but firm, "we need to correct something." He turned toward the doors. "There is a man who should already be in this room. His absence is our failure, not his. Open those doors, please." At the entrance, Ethan felt his stomach drop hard as the order hit. The doors swung wide, and Harris walked down the aisle, past rows of officers and guests, out into the lobby. He went straight to Ray, who straightened on instinct as the general stopped in front of him and came to attention. In full view of everyone there watching, Harris raised a sharp salute. "Captain Walker," he said, loud enough to carry, "with respect, this ceremony does not begin until you are inside." Back inside, the The room was still standing when Ray and General Harris stepped through the doors together, the echo of that salute hanging heavier than any music. Harris guided Ray toward the front, not to a spare chair at the side, but to an open seat beside a woman with tired eyes and a young boy clutching a small flag. "This is Mark Davis's family," Harris said quietly. "You belong here with them." The general turned to the microphone and told the crowd that some heroes earned their medals in the spotlight, and some earned them long ago and were forgotten by everyone except the men they saved. He spoke Ray's full name, rank, and unit, and for the first time in years, Ray heard his own story told out loud in a room that actually listened. Mark turned when he heard the name. His face broke into something raw and unguarded, a mix of shock, relief, and gratitude. "You came," he mouthed, eyes shining. When Harris called him forward again for the formal pinning, Mark didn't walk alone. He reached back, took Ray's arm, and gently pulled him beside him at the front of the stage. The photographer hesitated, then adjusted, framing them together as the medal touched Mark's chest, and the room rose in long applause. After the clapping faded and people began to move, Ethan finally made himself walk down the aisle. His shoulders were still straight, but the edge was gone. He stopped in front of Ray, hands open, voice low. "Sir, I was wrong," he said. "I looked at a list and a jacket and not at the man in front of me. I'm sorry." Ray studied him for a heartbeat, then nodded. "The list matters less than how we treat the ones who aren't on it," he replied. He laid a light hand on Ethan's shoulder, not as punishment, but as steadying weight. "Sit with us," Ray added, tipping his head toward the front row. "You might as well learn their names while you still can." Ethan sat quietly, grateful for a second chance. As the crowd drifted away and the lights dimmed, Ray and Mark stood for a moment beside the empty seats, one wearing a new medal, the other wearing old ribbons time had almost erased. Out there, in bases, factories, buses, and school halls, there are many like Ray, quiet people whose stories live in scars and memory, not on guest lists. Real honor is how we treat them when nobody is watching. If this story touched you, thank someone who served in silence today and share their story so, in this world, they are never told they don't belong again anywhere.